Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to the Poisoner's Almanac. I'm your co-host, Adam.
I'm Rebecca.
How you
I'm
doing, sweetie?
apparently teary-eyed because I yawned.
Oh, man. Now you got me.
You're welcome.
So, what's happened since the last episode?
I mean, we're doing this a little bit ahead of time because I'm going out of town again
True.
this weekend.
We're recording this ahead of time.
God help me.
Yeah.
Not too much.
Camilla went to
But yeah, she went to
a state park today for like an educational thing they do for school-age children.
Yeah, it was Fennessy Swamp Nature Park.
Nature Park.
Yeah, it's a swamp. And lots of cool, critters out there. So
Yeah. Let's go to some comments here from Spotify. We've got Blaufrosch, aka Clara Jurisons, one of our longtime patrons. She says, "There is no war in Ba Sing Se."
True.
This was from, what episode is that? Oh, the Unit 731 Part 1. Yeesh. And then also from Cornelia, she says, "Greetings from Poland. It is -4 degrees Fahrenheit here." Or -20 degrees Celsius. Quite cool. And then Clara chimed in, "We've been dipping just below 0 degrees Fahrenheit in Columbus, and I'm loving it." Let's go for some housekeeping for the old podcast real quick.
I really need to get better acquainted with the cold.
Better acquainted with the cold?
Well, like I walk outside and it's like 50 degrees and I'm like, right? I feel like my ancestors would be laughing at me right now.
Be sure to follow us, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. Thanks in advance for leaving 5-star reviews, especially on Spotify. That helps to push the podcast further into the algorithm. Be sure to follow us on socials, links in the show notes. And the Patreon is up and running. If you'd like to financially support the podcast on a monthly basis, the links in the show notes for that. Speaking of patrons, we have a patron who has left us a voicemail. It is the lovely Sasha, and we are going to listen to their voice.
Wait, so these have how old are these? You know what? Don't answer that.
All right. Ready?
Hello, it's me, Sasha, the first ever voice message sender.
That's right.
I wanted to say that I'm enjoying your podcast in Milan right now because I'm a spectator at the Winter Olympics at figure skating. And I just wanted to share this amazing moment with you because this is my special interest, figure skating. I know everything about it, I feel. And I really enjoy your podcast. And although I have withdrawn a bit from it because I try to focus on happy topics because my therapist told me so.
Understandable.
Yeah, I still enjoy it and I still really like it. And I really value the community. And yeah, I just wanted to celebrate this with you. And I think I just saw a Paralympic athlete at my hostel, which is amazing because the Paralympics are also happening right now. And this is so cool. I really like this. And also, fun fact, the first ever outed queer woman will perform at the figure skating event in singles, and I will be there, and I'm so proud of it. And so, yeah, just thank you for having this beautiful community, and I wish you a great day.
Yay. That was fantastic.
They're so great.
Thank you so much, Sasha. So the big takeaway from that voicemail is the Poisoner's Almanac is bad for your mental health.
I mean, it's bad for my mental health. I'm just kidding. But I mean, I've definitely had to take a break from certain podcasts that I love. I can't listen to certain episodes if it involves children, if it's true crime.
Oh man.
If it's certain things I have to, I still follow those podcasters, but I just know I can't deal with that. So I totally get that.
Yeah, because we cover some dark stuff at times, like today.
Yeah, but it is history at the same time.
That's true.
To learn from. So it is, while it's a messy business, it is something that needs to be talked about so that it doesn't happen again. because there are paths that people choose that can go down that path. So,
yes.
Also, Adam is amazing at figure skating and ice skating in general.
Now, what you people need to know is my wife has never uttered the words, Adam is amazing at anything.
Oh, please. I've complimented you before.
Have you?
I have. You're better at everything else, but when it comes to ice skating, watching you makes me feel
athletic.
Yes. It's pretty great.
Oh, man. It was.
I'll have to find a video.
Yeah. Don't we have one?
I'll find a video and I'm going to sell it on Patreon. I'm going to sell it on Patreon. I won't sell it. I'm just kidding. I'll put it out there for free.
Because all the world should know.
I wouldn't sell that. I'm going to give it to for free, you know?
All right. So we shout out all of our monthly supporting patrons on the podcast here. They are as follows: 87 Pens Girl 71, Mara Santiago, Grace Lahan, Genevieve, Nahev Shatreat, Jay Went, Inken Hafner, Kira Yorsek, Tay of Sunshine, Monique, Sue Steves, Megan Kyler, Liz B, Willie Wolf NZ, Nicole Rivers, Richard Miyako, Sasha Rubel, Maya Showstock, Maggie's Yarm, Ogre the Viking, Lynn Rocket, Brett Moser, Zaid, Neil Houdini, Nicole Crane, Jefferson Vargas, Carmen Q, Sarah G, Knitting Ninja, Estar, Olive Octopus, Betsy Rich, T-Bug, Christine Moljadi, Morgan Birmingham, Blau Frosch, Clara Jursons, Vix, Anne Maria, Clyde, Jennifer Wilson Richter, Too Fidgety, Wendy G, Elena MK, Caitlin Martin, Pungrammed 101, Minnesota SBT, Tasha, Stuart Slattery, Simone Valdez, Christian Scradergaard, Bonnie, Oma D, Rynel Alara, Kristen Arnold, Aaron Carey, Lynn Simpson, Melissa Emil, Desiree Davis, Jennifer Ramirez Johnson, Dalek Party, The Warped Witch, Dizzy Dancer, Creative Otter, Yadmit, Supergirl Sway, Rachel, Anya Brandt, Ebby, Leah Marie Matson, Lady Digitalis, Jesse, Shay 10, Julia Franzoni, Sparks, Gloria Eichmann, Thomas Huff from Strings to Things, Soy Kasumi, Jessica Gasparini, Kate Lennon, Donna Lanchanese, Lauren Smith, Anna G, Serpentine Fire, Melanie the SLP, Stuart Lee, Chris Millanak, Mackenzie Kennedy, Libby, Hetty, Hantapalooza, J Moon, Kelsey H, Paper Sky, Hannah Cook, Nikki Larkin, Campus R, Rawr, Britt Clark, Paris Longer, Andrea, Shameless Agitator, Ruby Salazar, Cassandra Smiles, Daniel Soar, Jasmine, Kapow 73, Dr. Doom, Maureen Hart, Justin Higgins, yeah. Nigel Hawkins, Judy Lowe, Nissa 16, Seamus Picked, Lisa DW, Jesse Pollard, Sarah Jahira, Everyday Delirium, Cody Griffith, April, Alicia, Mela Fantastico, Panda Cannoli, Amber Golder, Donna Foley, Michelle Cornett, James Mills, Teethweir 5. I'm not sure how to say that one. And please welcome our newest patron, Tonsi.
Oh, cool.
Tonsi. It sounds like an insult for the British.
No, I know this name. I'm wondering if this one has sent me messages in Instagram, because I know that that name sounds very familiar now.
Is anybody DMing you in a foreign language that you have to translate with your phone? No?
I don't think so. Not unless it's doing it for me and I just don't know. But I know nothing about AI or any of that. And I guess, that's kind of a good thing because of what it's kind of becoming and doing to the earth. But so I guess I'm not missing anything because I've never been into that kind of thing. So I mean.
So Unit 731 Part 2, I presume?
Yes. Right. And I need to
take us there, Skitch.
Oh, I'm gonna. And those of you trying to protect your mental health, do be aware. This one, just for some trigger warnings here, this one is going to have a good amount of subject matter related to human experimentation, because that's what Unit 731 was for, unfortunately. And so there's going to be some mentions of violence. There'll be some mentions of sexual assault. There will be some mentions of, just, I don't even know how to describe some of the things, but I don't plan on going into like nitty gritty detail, like gory stuff, anything like that, but it will be mentioned. So if I do happen to go into something that I've forgotten about that feels over the top or anything like that, I don't think I do. But if I did, I will definitely warn you guys as it comes too. So just in case. But yeah, it gets crazy. It's already gotten crazy. It's going to get a little crazier.
Mm-hmm.
Now, last episode, we went over how Unit 731 became what it was. We talked about Shiro Ishii. And basically, he was behind its creation, Ishii. I've just been calling him that. Ishii, Shiro. And we also touched on some major incidents around the time period that provided some context and that just kind of needed to be mentioned. One such incident was the Nanking incident, or what you may have heard referred to as the rape of Nanking. This occurred from December 1937 to January 1938. It was it was not just like a day long or anything. This involved Japanese troops who committed widespread, systematic, and brutal sexual assaults of thousands of Chinese women and girls, alongside mass executions of civilians and disarmed combatants. The exact death count is not known, but most historians place that number at 200,000 to 300,000 deaths.
Good.
Yeah, it's really bad. It's been referred to as the Forgotten Holocaust, likely because of the brutality, death, and timeline being close to, World War II, as Holocaust is a word associated with such. We also made mention of the Nomonhan incident, also referred to as the Khalkhin-Gol, the Battle of Khalkhin-Gol. Khalkhin-Gol is a river that runs across the battlefield, so that's why it was also referred to as that. But the Kwangtung Army, while official by name, often acted according to their own interests, as we kind of saw with their alliance with and support of Ishii and his Unit 731. Now, there were some arguments between them representing Japan and the Russians and Mongols that had become allies over territory lines. So this is where some of these conflicts come from between the Japanese and then the Russians and the Mongols, who had kind of stuck together through these conflicts. Now, between May through August of 1939, there were small skirmishes. These turned into full battles between the Kwangtung Army and the Russians and Mongols. I mentioned last episode that Ishii and Unit 731 had attempted to contaminate the river upstream from their enemies, the Russians and Mongols, with typhoid germs as biowarfare tactic. In the end, the Japanese lost to the Russian-Mongolian forces, and they called a ceasefire with the terms of accepting their territory lines. Now, the estimated casualties of this incident were between 17,000 to 20,000 plus for Japan, and roughly 10,000 to 26,000 for the Soviet Mongolian side. So a lot of stuff, a lot of deaths. Did not yet mention was the 1937 Marco Polo Bridge incident. No, they did not play Marco Polo on a bridge. This was also called the Lugo Bridge. Now, the full and exact cause is unknown, but while Japanese troops were conducting unauthorized training exercises, it was said that one of their soldiers, a private Shimura Kukujiro, I tried looking some of these names up. I couldn't find all of them, so forgive me if I say some of these names wrong. But he was reported missing. And so the Japanese demanded entry into this Chinese-controlled town of Wamping near the bridge, which was refused. They've already dealt with violence from Japan already. Why would they want to let them in, I guess? And this resulted in an exchange of fire around 2300 hours, around 11 p.m. The missing soldier actually returned later, saying that he had sought relief in the dark for a stomach ache, had become lost. Another source claimed that he had snuck off to visit a brothel. So,
probably the second one.
He went somewhere. They blamed it on them. That's the story that was given. Anyway, this incident ended up leading to full-scale war between Japan and China. This would be the second Sino-Japanese war, and the Nanking massacre that we talked about as well. So knowing the timeline, okay, let's go into more of Unit 731. It's important to know the timeline because there was a lot of hate between nations at this time. Now, some topics I have to mention concerning what took place are quite disturbing, as I mentioned, so just know that now. The Ishii Network was headquartered at the Epidemic Prevention Research Laboratory, which was established in 1932, and so Unit 731's activities were done under the guise of epidemic prevention research. Okay. In 1936, Emperor Hirohito issued a decree authorizing the expansion of the unit and its integration into the Kuomintang Army as the Epidemic Prevention Department. From August of 1940 on, the units were known collectively as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kuomintang Army. 731 for short. Unit 731 for short.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure they put the Water Purification Department in there because we talked about Ishii and his little water purification device he made, he's so proud of. And then he goes and does stuff like this. It's okay. Now, before moving on, it's important to understand, too, that Imperial Japan, when we're talking about Imperial Japan, Emperor Hirohito was seen basically as deity. Like, they literally saw him as a god. I think I had something in here from one of the
not
people.
the tabs.
Oh, there's plenty of tabs in here. Oh my God.
Show the camera. Y'all, this is what she does to a book when she is covering something.
I'm not going to be reading all of this. Don't worry.
No, she's not. But just look at the show the tabs again, please. Look at that.
They whisper to me.
Hold it still. Hold it still. To rotate it a little bit so they can see. Look at that. Look at that, people. That's what you're getting.
Well, I mean,
that's what you're getting. Okay.
When people ask Becca
what kind of work does she do, she's a podcast producer.
Okay, whatever.
Okay.
So this is testimony from a captain in the Japanese Imperial Army.
Captain, that is the point. You can make the little buggers love you.
Now, name was Captain Kojima Takeo.
Kojima.
I could be saying that wrong. I'm sorry.
Kojima.
But in his testimony, he talks about, we were born and raised in a society of emperorism. A person's absolute responsibility above the army and government was to the emperor. The emperor was a living deity. The emperor's command was supreme and controlled the entire country. We were told how we must serve the emperor, how we should behave toward our parents, how we should behave toward our teachers, and how we should behave toward our siblings. We were taught that Japan is a sacred country, that the people of Japan are a superior race, and that the people of China, Korea, Southeast Asia, and Russia were all inferior races, and the superior race must govern them. And by doing so, we would bring them happiness. This was the cause to which Japan must devote itself. In addition, shrines were built all over the country, and we all professed loyalty to the country and the emperor. This was our pre-war education. So it's just kind of important to know where they were mindset-wise, I think, as well. You know, how they were educated to see themselves and see their purpose, I suppose. Not that it, excuses anything that anybody did, but if people are wondering, like, how did they get there? Yeah. But more on Hirohito later. First, let's dig into what the main areas of experimentation were. Bacteria, obviously, because we talked about Ishii and his obsession with bacteriology. So bacteria, obviously, Ishii had a love of bacteriology, but also poisons, frostbite, and anatomy and physiology in general. Infections were studied at different stages, and this involved such horrors as vivisection. These were operations on the living subjects simply for experimental purposes. As you will hear, some of those that underwent vivisection were given chloroform as an anesthetic, which did not always work well, but many were given nothing at all and just cut into. Those tortured died on the table as their organs were removed and looked at for signs of disease, since infection was, passed on to them. Now, those who died were often preserved in various forms, some in pieces, others as whole specimens. And of course, I have some testimony on this particular subject.
Do you have a tab on that page?
I do. Yeah. Witnesses at vivisections report that the victim usually lets out a horrible scream when the cut is made, and that the voice stops soon after that. The researchers then conduct their examination of the organs, remove the ones they want for study, then discard what is left of the body. Somewhere in the process, the victim dies through blood loss or removal of vital organs. Yeah. Now, the research methods they talk about, they would work with interpreters because a lot of the subjects they were using were Chinese, Korean, and not everybody knew the language. So they had interpreters as well. Anesthesia was optional, kind of according to who was ever doing the vivisection.
Mm-hmm.
But according to one former unit member, as soon as the symptoms were observed, the prisoner was taken from his cell and into the dissection room. So they would wait basically until they saw symptoms of this disease that they were waiting on, that they had infected someone with. He was stripped and placed on the table, screaming, trying to fight back. He was strapped down, still screaming frightfully. One of the doctors stuffed a towel in his mouth. Then with one quick slice of the scalpel, he was opened up.
Ugh.
Yeah. And this one's kind of rough, but there was a woman that was interviewing. There was a brief video testimony provided by a Kuromizawa Masakuni. He was older at the time of this interview, and his voice is difficult to hear, but he was actually speaking of the time when he worked there and was actually working on a woman who had awakened from anesthesia while being vivisected. The woman interviewing him had asked, well, what happened? And he said she opened her eyes, she hollered. What did she say? And it says Kuromizawa could not answer. He began weeping feebly and murmured, I don't want to think about it again. But after a minute, he said that she said, it's all right to kill me, but please spare my child's life. 4 months after this interview, Kuromizawa died.
Good Lord.
So, yeah, pretty awful stuff.
Yeah.
Now, these atrocities were also performed on women, like I just mentioned, as well as children. While on this sensitive subject, pregnant women were not excluded from capture and experimentation. Some women and men prisoners were forced into sexual activities with the intent of STD experimentation or for pregnancy, sometimes both. So experimentation on STDs could be done on for fetal development, that sort of thing. Now, why would they need to know that if they're saying that this is defensive for their troops? They wouldn't, but okay. A male prisoner and a female prisoner were sometimes put together in a cell and forced at gunpoint to engage in these activities. There were also incidents of forced same-sex activities. This often occurred for the study of STDs like syphilis and gonorrhea, which were becoming a problem for Japanese soldiers due to visiting brothels and the existence of what were termed comfort women. These women were victims themselves, of course, and they were also at high risk of disease and violence. Now, comfort women were those forced into sexual slavery. Many of them Chinese or Korean, but they could have been from anywhere in Asia. By the end of the war, between 20,000 and 410,000 women had been enslaved in at least 125 brothels. In 1993, the UN's Global Tribunal on Violations of Women's Human Rights estimated that at the end of World War II, 90% of the comfort women had died.
Wow.
Yeah. Something that doesn't get talked about a lot. But that's what they called these women. But it was, it was sexual slavery. It was trafficking.
Yikes.
Now, in the context of Unit 731's experiments, one of the prisoners forced into this situation would be infected, and then the purpose was to see how it transmitted to another. When a man and woman prisoner were involved, the woman may become pregnant, and researchers wanted to study the disease's effects on the fetus, newborn, and other stages. But I won't go into any more of that if you don't mind. But
that's enough.
Yeah, especially with children, how I can't really do all that. But just to know that they were also involved, that they also did things to children as well. And I mentioned brothels and comfort women, as they were called, how they were victims of abuse. They also contracted serious forms of STDs as a result. Plague. Plague is another disease studied extensively at Unit 731. Plague has long been considered for biological warfare. It's efficient for such. I mean, in terms of amount of people that could be infected pretty easily, the way it travels and everything. And we've talked before about the Mongols who catapulted dead plague victims over the walls of Kaffa and Crimea, right, back in 1346.
Yeah. So
this idea of plague as a weapon is not necessarily new, but the researchers at Unit 731 definitely experimented with it in depth. Now, before describing these actual experiments, I do need to mention the involvement of the Youth Corps and civilians in Unit 731, because there were many who had an unintentional or persuaded hand in this as well. Now, Ishii's first facility, the one that they had abandoned after that escape had happened. Remember I mentioned that had happened. They were there for 5 years. There was an escape, and then they moved to Pingfang. Well, the first facility was run exclusively by government officials, military doctors, and technicians. Once they moved to Pingfang, Ishii decided to involve as many civilian researchers as he could for such purposes. He went to his old school in Kyoto. He went to Tokyo University and other medical universities to persuade other researchers and medical personnel to join him in Manchuria. Now, some gave in to the promise of furthering their research and advancing their positions, and some sent students to do the research for them, receiving the data as they did so. Now, not all of these researchers and medical professionals knew what they were getting into, at least at first. And at this time, students who defied their professors were basically throwing their futures away because of the power of such authority figures had. I'm not saying this excuses anyone, but just giving some more context on their points of view, I guess. Now, as we go on, you'll see that especially some of these senior medical personnel were just awful people, and continued to be so. Now, whatever the moral standards these researchers and physicians had before joining Unit 731, this is how Ishii roped in the medical community of Japan to the study of biological warfare and the use of humans as subjects. Even those who did not know about human experimentation specifically would have to have suspected it, considering the information, samples, preserved human specimens being brought to them, or lectures, or lectured about when Ishii would come to visit, which was pretty often. He would literally fly to these universities and show them specimens that they had, retrieved from these prisoners and stuff. Now, whether he talked about it outright, it's where's he getting these, right?
Yeah.
I need a book assistant. Just hand me the book. That'd be fun.
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. Yeah. Conscious as Ishii was of his own prospects for personal advancement, he made frequent trips to Tokyo's Army Medical College to present his work. The materials for presentation included more than graphs and drawings. He also displayed human specimens. The specimen jars themselves were made in Manchuria by European-trained Japanese, and specimens were regular passengers on the flights from Pingfang to Tokyo. Some contained extremities, specimens of arms, legs, and feet. Others contained organs. Some were heads. Still others were whole body specimens. So yeah, he traveled there pretty often to just sort of show off his stuff. Now, for some, out of sight, out of mind was the way to go. If they did not see it happening, then it wasn't something they were directly connected to. I mean, I don't know how you could do that, but some would come and go, just getting the data as they wanted, and then separating ties after the fact, or having a student remain behind to send them further data. We now know that knowledge of Unit 731 went as far as the imperial family and Japanese leadership themselves. So it's not like they didn't know about this at some point. Now, in 1994, former unit member Okajima, who was 78 years old at this time when he stated this, said, some things have to be corrected. There were no soldiers at Unit 731. They were all civilian employees. Now, it is known that both were present, but civilians were a great part of the experimentation. So it wasn't just soldiers, basically. Okay. There were also non-professional civilian workers who were given jobs like catching or raising rats for use of fleas and germ transmission studies. They were given roles within the prisons as translators and as assistants. Some built ceramic bomb structures that would later be used to release disease-carrying insects. Most were not made aware of the details of Unit 731, but still had some idea or had heard rumors or seen suspicious things. I read one story in this book, too, about there were some older men who were working sort of with the fleas section of what was going on, getting fleas from the rats so they could be used for transmission of plague and things like that. And I guess one of them learned a little too much, and then suddenly those guys were dead. And so
I still, every so often, I remember how they tried to blame Jewish people during the original
the
bubonic plague.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, they have ceremonial cleanliness
we talked about
rituals.
that. Yeah, we talked about that last time.
That's literally what it was, saving them from being infected as much.
Yeah, it's not like they couldn't be infected or that they were causing it.
It was less common.
They were able to.
Which makes you think about all the pushback, all the pushback to mitigation strategies. When COVID happened, it was like this stuff worked in the 1300s.
But even then, they swore like, no, you need to get dirty because it's good for your immune system. It's actually bad to have baths. That's what some people thought back in the day, and that's what some people kind of think today. Not gonna lie, may not say it that way.
Don't boil that milk. That's dumb.
If you stay in your house, there's no germs there, and your immune system will never build up. First of all, if your house has no germs, are you living in like one of those padded white, like clean rooms? Because
Monk would love it.
Like, okay, sure. One area of civilian involvement involved children. Doctrines of emperor worship and strict obedience to authority was taught as young as grade school. Many children in areas where medical research was being done would go on to become assistants to research staff within Unit 731, known as the Youth Corps. Boys from 15 to 17, typically, some were younger, were made to go through difficult and strict classes of biology, math, bacteriology, and foreign languages before actually helping on the unit. They were given such roles as removing purposefully infected fleas from rats, preparing necessary experimental tools, and carrying organs just removed from dissected prisoners to areas for preservation. Teachers of grade school and up were actually instructed to look for anti-Japanese sentiments in any form and report such so that the parents could be investigated.
Brother.
So, these same teachers were to promote Japanese nationalism and urge children to later go into the Youth Corps. And there's several testimonies here that I wrote down. Basically, a lot of these kids were like, I was told I'd be able to go into an airplane if I joined this club, basically. And next thing you know, they were overseas and being taught how to behead people and stab people with bayonets and basically get desensitized to this violence. Okay.
District 1.
It was some of the things I read in here. And it's like they're telling you they remember the feelings they had. Like, I remember being sick or shocked. But then over time, I did get used to it. Like, they still remember that. There was one quote in here where, as a child, one of them remembered hearing, "You're not a man until you've at least killed someone," or something like that. So, so it was that kind of thinking, that kind of teaching as well. Now, children in villages near Unit 731 facilities were also hired to raise or catch rats and provide them to researchers for experiments. So back to plague experiments, I mentioned that a lot of Youth Corps members and civilian workers at Unit 731 facilities were given the role of removing these fleas from plague-infected rats. These fleas were used among prisoners, but also intentionally dropped around Chinese villages. So they test them on the people in the prisons at Unit 731, but then they would go to other villages and just drop these bombs and see what happened to the area, basically see what happened to the villagers. In 1940, in an area in Ningbo, plague germs were mixed with wheat, cotton, cloth strips, and some other materials, then dropped from the air. More than 100 people died within a few days. One former resident of the area witnessed the attack when he was 14 years old and described it later. And I have that here as well.
There's a tab for that.
Yeah. This was a resident of the area, was 14 years old at the time, working in a tofu shop. He was infected, but managed to recover. And in his testimony, he said, one day a Japanese plane flew over and kept circling. Then it dropped something that looked like smoke. It was wheat flour and corn and other things. The next day, people started getting sick. 3 days later, the tofu shop owner's 2 children were dead, and other people were getting sick and dying. Nobody could understand what had happened. My own family died, one after the other. There was misery all around. Everyone who died did so in pain and agony, going into convulsions. At first, the bodies turned red, then after death, they turned black.
Wow.
The residents had to be separated according to health and evacuated while the rats were basically walled in to prevent them escaping to other areas. Everything within the walled off area was burned, and no one was allowed back until the 1960s, basically, to prevent any recurrent infections, just in case. Now, a similar attack occurred a few years later in September of 1942, and there was also a survivor of this attack who was 15 at the time, and she says of the incident, I was 15 years old at the time, and I remember everything clearly. The Japanese plane spread something that looked like smoke. A few days later, we found dead rats all over the village. At the same time, people came down with high fevers and aches in the lymph nodes. Every day, people died. Crying could be heard all through the village. My mother and father and all 8 people in my family died. I was the only one in my family left. My mother had a high fever all day. She was crying for water and clawing at her throat. Then she let out a roar like a lion and died before my eyes. Altogether, 380 people in the village died. At times, as many as 20 people died in one day. As soon as the first people started dying, Japanese people came into the village wearing protective clothing and masks. They went around the village for 3 days, giving injections to the people. They administered 2 shots, one to the arm and one to the chest. Some of the people who got these shots also died. So there's another plague attack survivor that was saying that they were told to go, that if they went to someone named Ren's house at the top of a hill, they would get treated. Said, my friend told me that his wife went to the house for treatment and later was seen strapped to a table with her body split open. So, they were dissecting people in this place. Another lady said something similar. 5 members of my family died. My mother and father both suffered from swollen lymph nodes, then a high fever. I was taken to Ren's house, as he mentioned, the other witness. Also, and I was there for 2 days. Then the next day, the Japanese went into the village again, and I ran away. The villagers gave me herbal medicines, and in time, my fever went down, and I lived through it. So thankfully, she got away from that area. So basically, during this incident, Ren's house, this was just a house about a kilometer away uphill that was used as a vivisection lab to study victims who had been told that this was a treatment facility. On to cholera, because cholera was another that they studied it pretty extensively. One method of spreading cholera for study was releasing domestic animals like dogs who had been infected with cholera-laced pork. Infected dogs were released into a village about 8 kilometers west of Jinan. The dogs would become ill and vomit. Other dogs would eat the vomit, as dogs sometimes do, and
Gross.
They would also get sick. This would result in sick animals leaving germs via vomit, feces around the village, which would eventually make its way to human contamination and illness. Now, around 20% of those who contracted cholera died. In 1941, there was an experiment involving the attack of Cheongda with cholera and possibly other agents, which reportedly led to approximately 10,000 biological casualties and 1,700 deaths among the ill-prepared Japanese troops that were also there. So sometimes their own troops were also exposed. But yeah, wild plague and cholera, as well as typhoid and paratyphoid, are mentioned extensively. Other biological agents tested on prisoners included tularemia, anthrax, smallpox, and botulism. And here I am again, reaching for the book. 237.
It's in the tab.
I feel like it's a choose your own adventure, but it's very morbid. It says, this is an intelligence officer at the time, Ogura Yoshikuma. I was also involved with bacteriological tactics. I went in and out of Unit 731 repeatedly, and I saw experiments carried out on humans. I used to carry back bacteria from Unit 731, inject them into pigs and other domestic animals, and release the animals into Soviet territory. And it was not only animals. I used people also. We would inject people, wait 2 or 3 days, take them up to the Soviet border, and send them in. There was also what we called Q operations. We would fill balloons with nitrogen and suspend containers of bacteria below them. They would be released to drift over Soviet territory to disperse bacteria. We never found out what effects this tactic had. Now with cholera too, they would literally contaminate like wells and things like that, food, and hand it out. In the 1930s and 1940s, there was a disease in the Manchuria area that the Japanese and Soviets encountered. This would be epidemic hemorrhagic fever, which doesn't sound fun at all. And so they were, studying this one as well. And they found that it was caused by a virus. And it was found to be carried by ticks, and it showed up with a high fever, followed by internal bleeding, and sometimes death, about a 15 to 20% mortality rate. Now, technically, it wasn't new. It had been present for some time in Manchuria. They just hadn't encountered it until then. Now, General Kitano Masaji had presented early findings of the illness at a medical convention, but also went on to see how it could be used for offensive purposes. And how did he do this? He used humans as subjects, of course. He had a team go into infested areas to collect rats so they could isolate the ticks from them. These ticks were ground up, mixed into a saline solution, then injected into humans. If the person showed symptoms, blood was taken from them and injected into another. If that person showed symptoms, they were dissected and their organs removed for study. Then these would be ground up and extracted for use in saline to be injected into another person. So this cycle was just repeated until they could isolate the pathogen. Wow. Now, Kitano and his findings were published in a prestigious medical journal, translated to Japan Journal of Pathology. But in his work, he listed his subjects as monkeys, just monkeys, quote unquote monkeys. That's what he wrote, was his subjects. Now, this could not have passed as accurate to anyone experienced in research or medicine, because he listed the temperatures of the subjects reaching up to 40.2 Celsius or 104.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, at this time, it was not considered, a thing for a monkey's temperature to get this high with illness. This is a while back too, but most people would have seen that at the time and been like, that's odd. Also, the monkeys were never identified according to species in the article, which was very uncommon. Not identifying a species lowers a value of the research, basically, and Kitano would not have done so without reason. So it's likely that most within the medical community knew or at least suspected as much and just accepted it as, okay. Frostbite. This has been labeled by leading expert on Unit 731, Professor Suniichi Keiichi, that's a cool name, as one of the cruelest experiments performed there. These tests were the specialty of physiologist Dr. Yoshimura Hisato, who had attended Kyoto Imperial University like Ishii had. It was actually there that Ishii recruited him for a specific purpose. Now, Ishii knew that if Japan were to go to war against the Soviets, a likely possibility at that point, then their forces would be exposed to freezing conditions, which they would in no way were used to. The Japanese troops had already seen cases of frostbite after invading Manchuria, usually in fingers and toes. A treatment had typically been marking the area, applying some ointment or whatever, and if nothing improved, they would cut it off, usually without anesthetic. So prevention of such in the future, especially if they were to go, fight in colder environments, was a priority to them. Now, training for such was done in colder northern mountainous areas of Japan, but measures did not stop there. Dr. Yoshimura supervised and conducted experiments on prisoners within Unit 731 in which frostbite was induced. A member of the unit and witness was later captured by the Soviets and revealed during the Khabarovsk trials how these experiments were done in detail. I don't know why I said it like that. Detail. Detail. Yeah. He testified that Dr. Yoshimura actually had video footage, as he liked to record in like the 16 millimeter like movies. Like he liked to record it for documentation. Mm-hmm. Others that worked at Unit 731 and had later come out to tell their stories, and they corroborated his testimony as well. Prisoners would be taken into below freezing conditions, often outside when temperatures in Manchuria were as low as -20 to -30 degrees Celsius. This is about -4 to -22 Fahrenheit. Sometimes electric fans were used to speed up the freezing process. He also had a refrigerator lab at Pingfang that could induce even lower temperatures, down to -70 degrees Celsius, any time of the year. Now, these prisoners would be tied up and exposed to such conditions with bare arms, legs, and feet, and constantly drenched in water. Ice that formed would be removed, and water would be poured over them again. This lasted for long periods of time, with researchers striking the prisoners' limbs with a club to listen for the sound that resembled the hitting of wooden boards. This was how they knew the limbs were frozen through.
Oh my God.
At this point, the experiments turned to testing treatments. Now, the tests varied in terms of treatments and timing. Such tests resulted in flesh and muscle dying and just falling from the bone, basically. Also, the shattering of brittle bones after being hit repeatedly in those conditions. In all cases, gangrene resulted, leading to the rotting away, and usually they would amputate extremities, or those would be left to die. Now, other members of Unit 731 that have come forward have mentioned seeing prisoners missing hands, feet. So after all of this, one of the discoveries made by Dr. Yoshimura was that rubbing the extremities to warm them is not effective. After all that, that's what he learned. He found that the best treatment involved placing the affected parts of the body into warm water between 37 to 40 degrees Celsius, or like normal body temperature. Now, Yoshimura's lack of remorse was pretty evident in an article that he wrote for the Japanese Journal of Physiology in 1950, in which he admitted to using 20 children and a 3-day-old infant in experiments which exposed them to 0 degrees Celsius ice and salt water. This is in the 1950s. He's like, yeah, this is what I did, and here's what I found out. Bro. Now, toxins were also used in various human experiments, as we mentioned in the last episode, including mustard gas. You may see this also called eperite. I think it was discovered in a place. It's named for where it was discovered in France, I think, or it was made in France for World War I, something like that. Lewisite, cyanic acid gas, white phosphorus, atomsite, and phosgene. This is testimony from an Army major and pharmacist who was at Unit 731. It says in April 1942, Units 731 and 516 joined together for tests near the Soviet border on the outskirts of the city of Halar. The tests lasted 3 days and used approximately 100 maruta, as they were called. You remember why they were called that? They literally referred to them as logs.
Yes.
4 pillboxes, I'm guessing these must be some sort of large box situation, were used, and 2 to 3 maruta were placed in a pillbox at a time for each test. Electrodes were placed on the victims, and a desk and monitoring equipment were set up about 50 meters away. Canisters of liquefied phosgene gas were thrown into the pillbox. As the gas spread and asphyxiated the victims, changes in their pulse and other vital signs were observed and recorded up until death occurred. When death was confirmed, the officers went to the pillbox, checking for residual gas with litmus paper, and pulled out the bodies. If there were any survivors, he says that the test was just done again. There were no survivors in the end. And then a tent was set up nearby where the dead were dissected. This same guy actually talks about, one time I saw a technician at Unit 731, a field grade officer, carrying out tests aimed at combating frostbite, which we just talked about. 5 white Russian women were used in the test at the time. The technician placed the women's hands into freezing apparatus and lowered its temperature to minus 10 degrees Celsius, then slowly reduced the temperature to minus 70 degrees. The condition of the frostbite was then studied. The result of the test was that the flesh fell from the women's hands and the bones were exposed. One of the women had given birth in prison, and the baby was also used in a frostbite test. A little later, I went to look into the women's cells, and they were all empty. I assume they had died. Yeah. A report from the Camo unit described mustard gas experiments on September 7th through the 10th, 1940, involving 20 prisoners in various clothing conditions. Subjects were exposed to up to 4,800 artillery rounds. Symptoms were documented at multiple intervals. In one case, fluid from blisters was injected into other subjects, and blood and stool were analyzed. 5 prisoners were forced to drink eperite, lewisite solutions. There was another case mentioned by a witness. This was in 1945. This is actually from Ishii's driver. Worked for him as his driver.
Okay.
By the way, his driver actually lost his own son to stray plague germs, likely from Unit 731.
Yikes.
But yeah, he's talking about around June 1945, we knew that things were coming to an end. So this is closer to the end of the war. About that time, one day, a truckload of about 40 Russians came in. There were a lot of subjects already on hand, and there would be no need for them. So the Russians were told that there was an epidemic in the region and that they should get off the truck to get preventive injections. Then they were injected with potassium cyanide. Other toxins experimented with included tetrodotoxin, like from pufferfish, heroin, and castor oil seeds, so ricin, basically. Detailed documentation would be done as effects were observed. There was also the testing of incompatible blood transfusions, the injection of salt water into humans, and injection of animal blood into humans. Physical experiments not involving toxins or bioagents included exposure to low-pressure chambers until their eyes burst, suspension upside down until death, crushing injuries and deaths, electrocution, forced dehydration using heat fans, exposure to extreme heat and burns, and being buried alive.
Wow.
But for now, let's take a look at some of the branches of Unit 731, because as I mentioned, there were several of them, but Anda was about 120 kilometers from Pingfang. This is about a 3-hour drive. It was an open-air testing site for Unit 731. So outdoor testing of plague, cholera, and other pathogens were done there using various exposure methods, including biological warfare bombs. Between 10 to 40 people, or marutas as they would call them, would be tied to crosses and circles of different sizes. I guess they could better compare and measure the exposure range. They were protected with headgear and a metal plate that hung from the neck down to the front of the body to prevent death or serious injury, because that's not what they were trying to do at this time. The arms and legs remained bare so that infected insects could bite them when released from these sort of ceramic bombs that they had made. They needed the test subjects to live, so they could retrieve further disease data from them. Diseases at Unit 731 were studied, like I said, in stages. So from, first infection onward, some being dissected mid-illness for study, something, we've already kind of looked at. But plague or other disease-ridden insects were dropped as bombs that would fracture and then set them loose, or they would be just released from nearby, depending on the test. In some cases, the prisoners were tied to stakes, anchored into the ground in different patterns and at various distances from release. Weather patterns were like a key bit of documentation here as well, trying to see what would happen with different patterns. Other experiments here involved the study of chemical weapons, shrapnel bombs, bayonets, and knives. So they would literally have the youth corps come in and stab people with bayonets to sort of desensitize them. And it was pretty awful. There was another incident that Ishii's driver mentioned happened here where a bunch of them got loose, untied each other. And so they couldn't go anywhere really. So they just ran them over. Ran them over. Yeah. Now the documentary Unit 731 Nightmare in Manchuria mentioned to determine the best course of treatment for varying degrees of shrapnel wounds sustained on the field by Japanese soldiers, Chinese prisoners were exposed to direct bomb blasts. They were strapped unprotected to wooden planks that were staked into the ground at increasing distances around a bomb that was then detonated. It was surgery for most, autopsies for the rest. Now, I saw a news article from May of 2023, actually, concerning this site. The writer of the article, Ben Turner, reported that a horror bunker run by Unit 731 was found near Anda. He writes, the archaeologists have partially unearthed the U-shaped structure, which is roughly 108 feet or 33 meters long and 67 feet, 21 meters wide, with interconnected rooms and tunnels branching from it. As the archaeologists have yet to step inside, the exact purpose of each room hasn't really been established, but the researchers have categorized what they believe to be laboratories, observation and dissecting rooms, holding cells, barracks, garages, bathhouses, dining areas, and wells. So he also made reference to some Unit 731's atrocities, which included the testing of grenades, bacterial bombs, flamethrowers, and chemical weapons. They also used X-rays with experimentation. I mentioned dehydration, spinning centrifuges, that kind of stuff there as well. Xinjiang was another site. This one was mainly a testing area for animals, such as horses, various edible animals from the area as well, rats, as well as they carry fleas that can be infected with disease. It was also known as Unit 100 and managed and directed by a veterinarian named Wakamatsu Yuhiro. This site specialized in pathogens effective against domestic animals, which could be used to attack like a nation's food source, livestock and stuff. The mixing of poisons with food and crops to test for dosages and effects on subjects. They also studied how to cause crop destruction, focused on creating large amounts of bacterial agents like anthrax, glanders, and the like. Guangzhou, this site was one of question for some time, but in October of 1994, a private research mission from Japan searched out details of its involvement. The researchers were able to locate and speak with a former unit member who confirmed that NAMI Unit 8604 was headquartered at Zhongshan Medical University in 1938. The medical building is still there, apparently, and there were other branches just of this particular unit in various sites nearby, studying bacteriology. Another former member who was interviewed at age 74 by the Japan Times in 1994 reported that one of the experiments there focused on starving people to death. He also said that a large number of Chinese refugees escaping from a Japanese invasion in Hong Kong had actually died after being given food and water provided by the Army Medical College of Tokyo. The food was intentionally contaminated with typhus. Another source said it was paratyphoid bacteria brought by the Japanese army and given to them to observe the illness and deaths. According to this witness, he also saw victims being operated on every day, and bodies were constantly piled up in the basement. They also raised rats to use fleas for vectors of disease like plague. Literally all these sites did this with the rats and the fleas. The unit was breeding 10,000 rats per month and producing 10 kilograms of plague fleas. This increased over the next few years to 15 kilograms per month. They were really interested in plague. According to confessions of a Japanese soldier, the unit had produced deadly bacteria for use against Chinese soldiers and civilians. Even local residents had observed Japanese soldiers collecting rats with military vehicles, transporting them in carloads to Unit 8604. That's this place. A Chinese witness there stated that there had been a pond of chemicals within the compound where the bodies would be disposed of since the facility had no incinerators. Beijing. This was the main site of Unit 1855. And I mentioned to you, I had a hard time finding these places when I looked them up. I found them in books.
It's really weird.
But looking up online, you have to look up Unit 1855. Like I had to go find their numbers somewhere else and then look it up. Because if you go Beijing Unit 731, I couldn't find anything. But if I looked up Unit 1855, there was. There was this facility and one not too far from it, about a 4.5-hour drive south of Beijing. But it was run by Surgeon Colonel Nishimura Yeni, who reported directly to Shiro Ishii. There was a Korean man who had immigrated to China when he was younger for school. I think his name, they would say it as Kui. I think they say it as Kui. It looks like Choi to us, but I think they pronounce it as Kui.
Okay.
Kui. But yeah, he immigrated to China for school. He was made to work as an interpreter with Unit 1855 between 1942 and 1943. It wasn't something he necessarily wanted to do. As you'll see, he tried to escape. He said that this site conducted experiments on Chinese and Korean immigrants in China using plague, cholera, and typhus. He was actually given sick leave when he faked appendicitis and was able to escape for a time. He was captured and given the water torture with hot peppers in the water. This would later result in permanent lung damage for him and ongoing health problems. It's been estimated that Unit 1855 killed about 1,000 people between 1938 and 1945, just that unit. Nanjing, this was Unit EI 1644 in Nanjing, just across the street from a Japanese Army's military airport. The unit used an existing 6-story Chinese hospital as its main building. You can actually visit this hospital today still. The hospital building housed the offices of the commander and the officers, while the prison and the research facilities were located in a 4-story annex. The camp also contained many other facilities, including barracks, a clothing disinfectant station, and an incinerator for the disposal of human and animal remains. And they also had a pool.
I'm sorry. The way you threw that in last detail.
So there's that.
There was also a beetle.
Now, the perimeter was surrounded by this 3-meter high brick wall topped with barbed wire, had electrically charged wires around it in some areas, was patrolled all times of the day. But it was run by this physician, Sunji Saito, who also testified about its activities. Though his statements are refuted by other witnesses, Saito stated that this unit never experimented on humans. But another researcher who was assigned there stated that vivisections were quite common there, as was the experimentation involving plague, typhus, and cholera. Such experiments were kept at the 4th floor, and only top medical and lab personnel were allowed to the floor. It's been reported that each week between 10 and 20 persons were exposed to poisons, germs, and different gases, and about 10 were killed weekly by gases, lethal injections, and bullets, after having been used as test subjects. Another witness who was once a soldier assigned to the unit said that they were not allowed to go above the 2nd floor, but they had heard rumors of such experiments. He said that he had heard that there were prisoners kept at the 4th floor and was told by an officer, quote unquote, "There is a lumber storage facility on the 4th floor. You never go above the 2nd floor. You got it?"
Okay.
Another researcher there, Hiroshi Matsumoto, testified the prisoners were all naked and kept in cages that looked like cages for birds and animals, very small, in the size of 1.2 meters to 1.3 meters in height, side, and width. They had to always have their legs crossed. After we injected live germs into the prisoners, we would wait until germs spread in the blood, and then we would take out all of their blood. So after about 6 months, prisoners would be taken to this treatment room where they would be given chloroform, cut open at their inguinal artery. After the body was emptied of enough blood, the body would start shaking in convulsions, according to the witness. The contaminated blood would then be used to infect food or given to flies, who would then be used as a biological weapon as well. In 1942, cholera and plague cultures made at this unit were used to sabotage Chinese troops and surrounding civilians, some by spraying said germs from low-flying planes, some by contaminating reservoirs, wells, rivers, etc., and others via fleas also bred at the site. Typhoid and paratyphoid were also used to contaminate wells and marshes, leading to local epidemics. Japanese soldiers were not always kept safe either, as accidents often led to their own troops also being infected and killed. And there's one person in here that talks about how they were working for Unit 731 and contracted plague, and they basically used him as another subject, basically. Yeah. So Singapore. Singapore had been captured by the Japanese by February of 1942, and a branch of Unit 731 was established there as well. This one was named Unit 9420 or Oka 9420. This one had its own branches as well, including in Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and Burma. Now, this branch specifically participated in attacks in northern Burma, Yunnan, China, and Papua New Guinea. News of this site reached the public in 1991 via a journalist from the Singaporean Straits Times who had interviewed former Singaporean statesman and Minister of Social Affairs, Othman Wok, who had worked there when he was younger. He had worked with other boys catching rats and removing fleas for the unit to use in plague research, though he believed at the time it was for medical or vaccine research. Japan was not a fan of this news being public at all. They denied the existence of such. However, U.S. documents show that there was such a site. So, more on the U.S. involvement in just a second. This witness also mentions that while he left the site in 1944, he had read an article after the war that a Japanese biological warfare attack on Chongqing had taken place using fleas, and he feared that he'd been a part of that. A retired physician at the time that this all came out also confirmed that he had been the head of the site after being transferred there from Harbin. Experiments there involved using fleas from rats as vectors for plague, as well as using other agents such as glanders, malaria, cholera, smallpox, typhoid fever, dysentery, and anthrax. Its involvement in human experimentation is still being looked into. There was a military doctor, Hirano, his name, was also witnessed to have experimented on prisoners of war from the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. So there were some mixed in from those places as well. American Lieutenant James McMurray as a prisoner of war, witnessed human experiments at a POW camp, and testified to the U.S. War Department after the war. Pretty much the same thing. In the Philippines, Unit 9420 established a branch in Manila. The locations and the functions of Thai and Burmese branches of the unit still remain unknown. There were other branches as well, some that we just don't have time to talk about, but at different sites, similar kind of stuff went on. There was also a secret plan involving Ishii and Unit 731 research to enact a biological attack on American soil. It was named Operation PX, and the idea was for a Japanese sub to approach the American coast and release planes that would spread plague, cholera, and possibly other pathogens over land. Sub crews were to run on land carrying germs as well. It was planned as a suicide mission, basically, like literally. But they were willing to go with it. They knew they were losing the war at this point. It was around this time that America had brought in new incendiary bombs. They had just attacked a large lower-class neighborhood of Tokyo. The American incendiary bombs resulted in an estimated 100,000 Japanese civilians burned to death by old-school incendiaries and a new one called napalm.
Mm-hmm.
War sucks.
Mm-hmm.
The Japanese biowarfare plan was finalized on March 26, 1945, but the Chief of General Staff, General Umezo Yoshihiro, ordered it scrapped at the last minute. He rationalized that if bacteriological warfare is conducted, it will grow from the dimension of war between Japan and America to an endless battle of humanity against bacteria. Japan will earn the derision of the world. So somebody actually makes a little bit of sense in this whole story. Of course, he was not liked for this. He was later ordered as the one to sign the surrender aboard the USS Missouri, and he would later be convicted of war crimes by the Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, who was an American general.
Yeah.
So, which is kind of like he literally stopped us from being bombed. But anyway, he was actually sentenced to life in prison where he died in 1949.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as the end of the war and Japan's defeat neared, Unit 731's top officials, including Ishii, ordered for the sites and specimens to be destroyed. They wanted all evidence of the experimentation and work with biological warfare to be destroyed. Any remaining prisoners were killed and their bodies burned. Top officials, researchers, and medical personnel, plus their families, fled via train back to Japan. And along the way, Ishii gave them a grave warning. Ishii came over to us carrying a big candle and said, "I'm sending you all back home. When you get there, if any one of you gives away the secret of Unit 731, I personally will find you, even if I have to part the roots of the grasses to do it." He had a fearful, diabolical look on his face. My legs were shaking, and not just at me, at everyone. Even if I have to part the grasses. He told us never to go for a job in public office. So, yeah. So back at the different sites, crews they were attempting to destroy the buildings and equipment. Some buildings were honestly so formidable, they were hard to tear down. So there's still some that are actually standing today. And I don't want to go too deep into the politics, obviously, of what happened next. I'll just tell you the short story here. America knew that Japan was up to biological warfare and experimentation to some degree. They knew. So they sent experts, these U.S. military microbiologists from like Fort Detrick, in to investigate and persuade officials connected to Unit 731 to explain what they'd been doing and what, they had learned as a result. And eventually Unit 731 officials, including Ishii's number 2 man in Tokyo, Naito Raichi, sought a deal with the U.S. The U.S. had threatened to let Russia come through instead, and the Japanese did not want the Soviets getting their information or putting them on trial because they knew they would be screwed at that point. So basically, Naito had dealt with Americans before, having visited and even requested samples of yellow fever once to take back to Japan. Thankfully, that request was denied. So documents were handed over, meetings were held with them back home in the U.S. Certain military officials, Fort Detrick officials, General of the Army Douglas MacArthur, who would lead the SCAP that I mentioned within Japan during the occupation after the war, Dr. Norbert Fell of the U.S. Chemical Warfare Service, who answered to the U.S. Army's Chemical Corps, all the way up to President Truman as well, decided that with Russia possibly being a problem in the future, it might be good to make a deal with Japan's team of researchers. This deal promised total immunity from war crimes to those involved with Unit 731 for the exclusive, full information learned through their experiments. The American military and government all the way up knew about the human experimentation as well as the various deadly attacks on Chinese civilians using biological warfare and said, but their info is worth forgetting their war crimes.
No.
Now, the Soviets thought differently, and honestly, I'd say rightfully so. After all, their people had been used in these experiments and attacks. In December of 1949, the Soviet Union placed 12 former Unit 731 members on trial in the city of Khabarovsk. They were each given sentences between 2 and 25 years in a hard labor camp, which is pretty light considering Soviet justice. And it may be that some Unit 731 info was also given to the Soviets in return for leniency. It was all a mess, and America just wanted to sweep stuff under the rug, for info that some later found substandard at best. America also coined the trials at Khabarovsk communist propaganda and refused to recognize them as just. While America did give those in Unit 731 immunity, they did indict 9 Japanese physician, professors, and medical students in 1949 for conducting vivisection upon captured American pilots. 2 professors were sentenced to death and others to 15 to 20 years imprisonment. So when it came to 2 pilots, which obviously, okay, but you're going to give the rest of them immunity, even though they've killed tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous. Now, there were trials in other countries concerning Japanese war crimes against specific nationalities as well. Tokyo had its own tribunal, but mainly of military personnel that they deemed as traitors because they didn't like what they had done, right? Any mention of biowarfare or poisoning was quickly thrown out of their little trial. So the perpetrators of Unit 731 basically just got away with their horrific war crimes. At least 3,000 men, women, and children, of which at least 600 every year were provided by the Kempeitai, were subject to Unit 731 experimentation conducted at the Pingfang camp alone. That's not including the victims from other medical experimentation sites, such as Unit 100. Although 3,000 internal victims is the widely accepted figure in literature, former unit member Okawa Fukumatsu claims that there were at least 10,000 victims of internal experiments at the unit, he himself vivisecting thousands. Most prisoners were Chinese, but also included many Russians and Koreans. American, French, British, Indian, and even a few Australian and New Zealand prisoners of war were also reported there by unit members. So just some demographic info. But yeah, they were given total immunity because America was like, we'll take, you know what, you give us your research. We know you did it on people, but we may need it for our war against the Soviets. So yeah.
All right. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you guys for listening and watching. We'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye.